Hello, hello, hello. How are you doing? We all here?
Hi. Great,
Good.
thanks.
Hello, and Laura, you with
Yeah,
us?
all good. Good morning,
All
everyone.
good. Nice one. Good morning. So everyone, thank you very much for joining. I'm Mitch from Trust Keith. I'm going to be hosting today's session. Just for a bit of context, I'm Director of Revenue at Trust Keith. For those who don't know, Trust Keith is one of the leading DPO as a service businesses. So we're trusted by hundreds of scale-ups to help them manage their global data protection requirements. And we do this through a combination of in-house experts and technology. For today's session, we're going to be talking about AI data governance and specifically how businesses and operations leaders like yourself can adopt AI without losing control of privacy, security, and just general operational risk. The format for today is pretty simple. So we're going to spend around 40 minutes or so talking to an excellent panel of subject matter experts about different aspects of the topic. And then we've got some time for questions at the end. Couple of housekeeping points before we start. Number one, feel free to drop in questions on the chat at the bottom. Number two, the session's being recorded and we will share the recording afterwards. And number three, we're going to be sharing an AI policy template that we use of work across our customer base at the end of this, along with the recording as well. So with that said, why don't we jump into some introductions? Laura, would you be happy to kick us off?
Sure. So good morning, everybody. My name's Laura. I am a operational AI consultant. So I work with startups and scale-ups, helping them understand what AI means for them, how they can integrate it into their team's ways of working and the operations of their business. I come from an ops background, so I was COO at Naked Wines, which is a D2C wine retailer, and then co-founded Lalo, which is a box wine brand. So I sort of saw that kind of scale up type business, saw the 0 to 1 business, and as soon as I tried AI, I thought this is going to have huge impacts for how we think about how we run our businesses. So left the world of wine and got into AI in 2024.
Nice. Love that background. Thank you, Laura. Adam, over to you for a quick intro.
Thanks. Yeah, so hi everyone. Adam Fowles. I am an operator working within SaaS businesses. So previously worked at a business called Open Dialogue AI. We were a sort of AI agent organization deploying AI agents into the FINS market. My role was kind of founding operator. Obviously, recently been around how do we deploy or utilize kind of AI tools within the business. So understanding then implementations of that, and then also the repercussions of deploying those and what that means for our data and what that means for our clients as well.
Nice. Thank you, Adam. And Nick, last but certainly not least, over to you for a quick intro.
Hi, I'm Nick. I'm one of the DPOs here at Trust Keith. I've been a DPO for just over a decade now in various forms, different places. And I've got a background in artificial intelligence spanning back from, well, about 2008 or so. But as we all know, everything changed a few years ago when the LLMs all kicked off. So very keen to talk to people about how to use AI responsibly in their business.
Nice. Thanks, Nick. And obviously, unrelated to AI, but you also run a brewery as a service business. And I've realised we've got a beer expert and a wine expert in Laura on the call. So if anyone
Yes, we do.
to talk about drink after, we've got all the right people. So back to AI though. Laura, would you be happy to kick us off and just give us a bit of context as an operational AI consultant, what you're seeing happening inside businesses right now that you work with?
Yeah, so I spent the last 2025 working with an AI implementation consultancy, and we talked with lots of different businesses about, building AI for them, but nobody was quite ready to start building. Everyone was just sort of watching and waiting and seeing. But I think something has happened this year so far. I think it might be that Claude has got scarily good. People have had their aha moment. Like particularly founders and leaders have had that moment where they've seen, okay, this is getting good now. I can see how this could, change how I work and therefore change how my whole business works. And people are starting to get ready to take action. So it's quite an exciting time that people are experimenting and people are, starting to build things and getting more confident and more experimental. But of course, as is the topic today, the more people are experimenting, the more you need to think about what the potential impacts of that could be on your business if something goes fairly wrong. I think co-work has really changed the game as well. Claude co-work, where all of a sudden AI is no longer just a chat box, a chat bot, and a text box on your screen. It can start to access your data. It can start to create things. It can start to delete things. It can start to send things. And while the ability for your AI to have hands and tools and to start taking action is really exciting from an operational perspective, obviously that's something that needs to be very carefully managed. So the AI policy as a concept is something that is definitely coming up a lot more in recent weeks.
Certainly is. Adam, what about you as someone who's worked in an AI business and obviously as an ops leader, what are you seeing?
Yeah, so obviously everyone's excited, but then it then falls down to who's going to actually own these things that people are actually building and deploying and using. So I think, one of the big challenges at the moment that I've seen and I saw within the business that I previously worked at is really who owns it, and ends up being the kind of ownership ends up coming to us as kind of operators in the business by default. And is that the right thing? Are they the right people to be owning it? I don't know. But I think but it naturally does come to that person who is the sort of jack of all trades, who's willing to kind of get involved and willing to kind of try and figure out what it means from a governance point of view, especially as quite often the operator is someone who is also looking after kind of ISO or GDPR or whatever else in the business as well. So it's like, how do we manage those systems? And then I think the other thing for me, the biggest risk within the business is obviously everyone is having loads of fun and they're all well-meaning, but obviously that ends up kind of sometimes then meaning that it becomes a bad act, that someone becomes a bad actor without really knowing they're becoming a bad actor in the business, and kind of exposes something that we don't want them to as well. So that's some of the things that I'm seeing within our business.
Yeah, definitely. I hear lots of people refer to it as the Wild West right now. And on the ownership point, that's definitely something we see a lot at Trust Keith when it comes to data protection more broadly. It's like, who owns it? And it's usually the ops leader who gets it lumped on their plate on top of like 100 other fires that you have to put out. So yeah, very often the ops people. Nick, what about you? Any think headline that you're seeing before we start to jump into some of the more specific risks that businesses are facing around this?
Yeah, I think as Laura mentioned earlier, everything seems to have really kicked off this year. Before, the AI seemed to be very much used for fun. You saw a lot of people just using it to generate, a little bit of news article content or, just some fun pictures and so on. But this year, it really seems to have become an actual useful tool. The difficulty and the risk of that is that a lot of businesses are now using AI, but they're not using it in a structured way or with any governance around it, because it's just really suddenly blown up from this plaything to something that people are really seriously using. And I think that's where putting policies and things in place is going to be absolutely essential for the next stage.
Yeah, and Nick, from your perspective, with your DPO hat on, what are some of the primary risks that you are seeing play out across companies who are testing out and using AI now?
Yeah, well, I think the very first one is that you've got a lot of senior leaders who are very kind of scared of AI in a way because they feel a bit left behind and they don't fully understand it. You've got a new cohort coming up who's almost come in as AI native, and there's been some kind of pushback from the top down of, we're not going to be using AI because I don't really understand it. But what we've found is that blanket don't use AI policies just aren't working. Your employees are using AI, whether or not you endorse it, whether or not you want them to, even if they're just putting it into ChatGPT on their phone just to ask a question to get clarity for a meeting, or, worst case scenario, they're putting out some of your sensitive data there on a free LLM model, and that's been ingested and used for training further down the line. Like, a lack of visibility and a lack of an approved solution just creates loads of shadow AI all over your business that you don't have any insight into.
Yeah, and Adam, what about you? What were some of the biggest risks you have seen play out, particularly in your last company? Because I'm aware that your last company provided services to larger companies with a higher risk appetite. Were you seeing that kind of Wild West kind of approach there within customer businesses or not?
Well, yes and no. So yeah, definitely in a lot of customers. So within a lot of the customers that we worked with, especially in the insurance market, they were quite archaic in their sort of setup and in their adoption of AI tools. So they were very scared to use this. So probably more on Nick's point around, that worrying kind of whether we should adopt it. Is it the right thing for us? Is there the risk here from a data exposure point of view? Should it be ingesting the information that we need, that it should be like that? There was lots of worry and concern from my point of, well, from our customers' point of view. I'd say from an internal point of view as a business, the biggest worry for me, because we were working with those types of businesses, and we had ISO accreditation, and we were working with businesses that were FCA compliant as well, is that exposure to PII and concern around how, what sort of data we're sharing with these data models, and ultimately what the repercussions of that would then be for us, and then ultimately for our customers. So there was definitely the Wild West within our own business, and kind of building of stuff. And obviously there were things that came up and certain scenarios that happened where data was exposed that probably shouldn't have been, that was then discovered. And so yeah, so there's definitely then there is a need for some guardrails to be put in place for sure. But yeah, I think with all businesses that everyone's still figuring it out right now, and everyone's still trying to figure out what guardrails to put in place and what's a good place to start with those guardrails. And is it a policy? Is it just some best practices? Like I don't. Yeah, everyone's still figuring it out, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. And Laura, what about you? And I'm conscious that, like, when we think about AI risk, the majority of people, when we think of AI, you are referring to effectively OpenAI and Anthropic and using those LLMs. But there are risks for tools outside of that are becoming. I mean, these tools are becoming increasingly appealing as well. So, any thoughts on the more broader risks outside of just LLMs as well?
What kind of tools specifically? So yeah.
So it could be things like OpenClaw,
Okay.
and N8N, or any other tools just outside of like the more traditional, well, they're not
Yeah.
quite traditional, but LLMs.
Yeah, so OpenClaw, if people aren't aware, it is a open source project that really kicked off at the start of this year in January, and it was like Claude on steroids, right? So I downloaded it in like January, when I obviously I'm like deep on Twitter, like AI Twitter, and sort of saw about this quite early, downloaded it and had that like, oh my God, this is like talking to a human that can do stuff. And it was like proactively messaging me to remind me about stuff. And it just seemed magical. And then of course, once it reached like a certain level of sort of public awareness, that's when everyone was like, oh, okay, well, maybe this isn't great, something having access to your whole life and being able to sort of take action without realizing it. I was like, okay, I'll move that to a separate laptop. Obviously it's amazing that we're all sort of used to ChatGPT now, and it's kind of amazing how quickly that has become table stakes. But the next level of where people are getting that like, oh my God, aha moment is with this very like agentic AI, like OpenClaw, like, there's another one called like Victor that's quite hypey at the moment that you can put into your Slack. But obviously for that like wow moment of something feeling like a human, you are just opening yourself up to so much more risk, because this thing has so much more autonomy and has so much more access, which obviously like as a business you need to think about very carefully. And I suppose the businesses that are really sort of pushing the boundary on AI at the moment, like, are the ones that are like really excited and they really want to race ahead and they want to try that like new latest tool. And there's a lot of hype around like, businesses that are running on OpenClaw. But I think, if you are taking data and privacy and security seriously as a business, like there's so much that you need to think about, even just for using like straight up Claude, yet alone starting to use these like very, at the edge tools like OpenClaw. So yeah, I think the foundations need a lot of work first before starting to go too crazy with OpenClaw and Hermes and things like that.
Yeah,
I think
that
so.
makes sense.
Just to add on to what you were asking there about kind of, you mentioned N8N, and I think there's a big thing here around kind of automations being created by people or processes being created by teams that are then the knowledge sits with that person, and it isn't an institutional owned thing, it's a person owned thing. And there's risk there that either it's created and left, and then there's a big risk that it's then making decisions in the background that the business is unaware of. That person may leave, or that person may move within the business, but it's not managed, it's not governed. And there's huge risk there around kind of those automations that there should be some governance in place around those. And it's like, cool, go at it, but go at it with some kind of with some frameworks, some guardrails in place. And then I think the other thing, just to kind of that I kind of didn't mention that I wanted to mention, was just that exposure of IP for people and kind of institutional knowledge as well. And that sharing of that information and kind of giving exposure to, especially as a SaaS business that I've previously worked at, and that space, obviously a huge amount of IP sits within the code base and within the platform and within how that works, that's then being accessed, edited, shared, and people, previously, I mean, less so probably now, were copying, pasting chunks of code in. Can you help me with this? Can you rewrite this? How might I think about this? And so I think there's just huge risk there. Well, not huge. There is risk there that needs to be managed and thought about, and built into kind of those engineering processes within the business, that need to be considered.
And Adam, what do you say to the chief commercial officer or chief sales officer who says, "Oh, you're a naysayer. I just need to use this stuff, and you're getting in my way. I don't care about the risks."
Well, I flash a contract in place with a customer that says that we have to abide by certain security and governance rules, and I think absolutely there's here, go at it. We want people to go and build something that's fantastic and that they can use and they can flash in front of customers and that they can get better data in front of them. But there is also the reality of that, of we need to just think about the risk that sits with that. And there's a risk scale, I guess, that to build into any kind of policy or process that you put in place that sort of says, what does this expose us to, commercially and legally? Does this expose us to this huge big thing that could mean that we could be out of business? If yes, then let's sort of scale this back. If it's a small risk and we're willing to manage that risk and have that risk managed, fine. Let's go at it and go and have some fun. But I think we'll get to that, I guess, in a bit of what does good practice look like. But I think that kind of is something that we'd want to consider in that space.
I can start to hear the ISO 27001 hat coming out there of the risk quantification. There we go. So Nick, and a question has come in which is kind of related to this. The question is there a difference between ownership and accountability? If so, please can you expand? So I wondered if you could take that one.
So I think the key part is that the accountability will not lie with the AI, will not lie with the LLM or the agentic or whatever. The accountability always has to lie with the team and the person and the company. So while you might have one of your units in the business that's owning the AI from perhaps an operational point of view, the accountability could be with sales or legal, whoever's actually using it for a certain action. And it's not going to be good enough to say, oh, the AI made the decision, the AI is accountable for that. The accountability always has to lie with a person or a committee or something within your governance structure in the business. So that's where getting things right from the start becomes really, really important. AI is going to be, as I said earlier, AI is going to be used in your business regardless. So you need to make sure that there is a proper accountability matrix for it, because your data is going to be going into it. You might have potentially sensitive data or customer data going into your AI. So you need to make sure that there's your frameworks in place for that. And, the Adam's talking about kind of people saying you're slowing it down with all of these rules and things, but it kind of brings back to the analogy that we use all the time of brakes on a car allow the car to go faster. Putting these controls and these guardrails in place are what allows us to use these AIs in a really powerful way. Without those, you end up limiting yourself because you can't do those things responsibly.
Yeah, that makes sense. And Laura, I guess the solution to all this, just whip up a policy and you're done, right?
Yeah, just put it in a PDF, put it on a Google
Yep,
Drive, and then go home.
easy.
Yeah, easy. Yeah, I've noticed that, especially for there's two types of people. There's the people that are, as we've just said, they're like, oh, who wants policy? Who wants accountability? Go, go, go. And then there's people that are like maybe a little bit more certain. And the people that, want to go, 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 even just hear the word policy and governance and like recoil and like
Yeah,
don't want to know, like don't try and stop me. We're, going to lose the race if we don't. And then the people that perhaps aren't feeling great, like policy can help them feel sort of more comfortable and sort of less risky and more encouraged to experiment. But even then, like policy doesn't feel like a very actionable word. So, I kind of think you don't policy is perhaps the wrong word for what we're trying to do here. It's, how can you have a positive AI culture as a business that allows the, people at the front to like experiment and, push the boundaries and see what the potential is in a safe way. And then also something that, helps the people who are a little bit more nervous to feel comfortable and that they're not going to break anything or do anything bad or whatever. So yeah, I try to create a positive AI culture within a business rather than talking mentioning the P word, even though effectively it is what you guys would think of as a policy.
yeah. What about you, Adam? Did you find people love the P word too?
Absolutely not. Yeah, it's similar to related into ISO. Sort of as soon as you put a policy in place around something, everyone's like, "Oh, I'm not going to read that," but it's there as a back. But Laura's right though. Like having for a certain swathe of employees, like having a policy in place, just kind of knowing the policy's there means that they kind of have some they know that they can go and do something, or they know where to go and look. For others, it feels like a kind of a blocker, or it feels like you're not allowing me to kind of to really kind of go and do what I need to do. So I've found recently that the thing that's enabled a lot of people around the space is kind of framing it as best practice guidelines or something along those lines, and creating short little looms or creating like short little kind of how-to videos or what nots to do or things like that sit on Notion. Or I think those sort of more kind of action orientated guidelines have sort of sat a lot better with teams or with people than kind of just saying here's a policy. To a certain extent it's a policy, like it says what you're supposed to be doing, but it's more action orientated, so reframing it slightly kind of has just landed well. And I think for some people in the business, it's also then reframing it and saying, look, as Nick said a minute ago, this is an enabler, this isn't a blocker, and kind of trying to reframe that. And I think it's going to be a problem that we're always going to come up against as operators in the business. We're very much people who are there about implementing process and governance within businesses, and it's an age-old problem of like that you come up against, and it's what's the best way to try and get something that the business needs to be aware of and follow, but how do you get people to follow it all the time?
Nick, I feel like the policy words gets a bad rap, and I feel like there's like this legacy kind of consulting industry style thing where it's assumed by employees across the business that a policy is a big fat document that's 50 pages long, full of legal jargon, and then like no one wants to listen to it. So like, what's a good starting point for a policy in context of AI governance?
Well, the important thing is that the policy is still an important starting point, but you need to be pairing it with your education, your training, and your practical guidance. Like, as you say, having a 20-page PDF on a Google Drive somewhere, all that means is that nobody reads it. What a 2-minute checklist that someone can go through when they're starting up a project or looking at implementing a new technology is much more effective than a 20-page document that's never read at all. So businesses need to make it easy for people to use AI in the right way, and they will use it in the right way. If you're making it difficult, if you're having a big long policy or a huge load of checkpoints, people just aren't going to follow them. That's speaking purely pragmatically, and they'll start using it in unsafe ways, in ways that should be restricted. It's all about making it easy for people to do the right thing, and then they will do the right thing, and showing them why they're doing it.
And there's obviously now a new way to make it easy for people to do the right thing. So still have the 50-page policy that has all of the details in it, but create a shared Claude project that has that as context so that someone, whether they're a super user or they're not feeling very confident, like, hey, is it okay to upload this doc to this tool? And it can feedback yes or no, which can like arguably be a sort of more robust way of interacting with the policy than a checklist.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I don't know if you were saying 50 pages facetiously, but just for everyone on the call, like it shouldn't be 50 pages. I think the one that we're going to share after is like 10 or something like that. But the shorter you can get it, the better. And Laura, I wonder if you just could carry on that point. So what do some of the right guardrails, or what are some of the good basic guardrails? What do some of the good basic guardrails look like the company should be thinking about?
Yeah, so one thing that comes up quite a lot is approvals for new tools, because obviously there's always something new and someone sees something on Twitter, on LinkedIn, it's like, oh, look at this, it's amazing. And people either just download it and plug everything in because, they can, or there's someone on a tech team who's got this, gets a message every day saying, can I download this? Can I do this? You've then got a CFO or a finance director tearing their hair out because they're like, oh my God, how have we managed to spend that much money on AI tools? So I think one sort of good place to start is understanding what's right for you as a business when it comes to approving new tools, because again, you want this balance of like, if there is something that is like new and solves a problem for you and is going to work well, like go for it in a safe way. But equally, there's just so much that you can just get distracted by a new shiny toy each week. So a really good place to start is like having guardrails around what tools your team can use.
Yeah, and this is maybe venturing outside of like the data protection and governance angle, but I do find that like one thing our lead DPO Kaylee says a lot is like when like use a new AI tool if it actually solves a problem. There's definitely, because there's so much excitement around it, there's this habit of people just trying things almost for the sake of it and trying to find a problem for it. So I mean, a good starting point to reduce that is just make sure you're actually solving a problem.
Definitely. It's why I'm sorry, just one last thing. It's why I'm trying to like make the term like operational AI a thing. I don't think many people are kind of using that term. I'm trying to make it a thing because AI is great as a tool, but operational AI is like looking at your operations. That could be your marketing operations, your finance operations, not sort of strictly just ops, but starting there and then figuring out what is it that we actually need to do. And when you're solving this problem, can an existing tool that we already know and trust do the job? Do we actually need something new? But very much starting with the process, not the tool.
I think it makes a ton of sense. Adam.
Just a question, but a ponder. Like how, so one of the things that I've had discussions with various people about is at what point do you invest in tools? And I think something that comes up quite often is, everyone gets excited about, oh, let's go after this tool, or let's go down this route, or let's try this thing. And I don't know whether, Laura, you've seen it kind of going into different businesses. Like I've got experience in one. I don't know whether you've seen it in others, whereby like organizations have spoken to you about it. It's like, okay, where should we kind of go? We're going to put our bet on this horse and kind of follow this. And I guess Claude versus OpenAI has been a big kind of decision maker for a lot of businesses. I guess there's also Copilot as well, and a whole swathe of other tools. And obviously they're constantly changing. So every month a new tool comes out, a new thing kind of trumps the next thing. And it's sort of at what point do you kind of go, I'm going to put my bet on that horse and going to go with it, rather than having 1,000 tools that you're then kind of trialing all the time and playing with.
Yeah, it's a tough one because they are, kind of leapfrogging them. And at the moment, I'm obviously a massive like Claude fangirl. Like, they think it's best in class at the moment. But who knows? Like, so many of us like run our businesses in Google. All it takes is like Google to, leapfrog, and then that's way more convenient. And even yesterday they had a launch of a whole load of new stuff like Google Spark that can like be your personal assistant for kind of open claw style, but in theory safe. It's just really difficult, and there is no right answer, I think, because it is moving ridiculously, unimaginably fast. Like there is just literally no right answer, and it's just going to be quite a turbulent time. I think the best thing this is, we're veering away from policy here, but the best thing that you can do is try and like own the data, own the workflows, and be able to plug tools into something that you own. But that's obviously quite a sort of more technical data and sort of architectural decision, but trying
Yeah.
not to get too wedded to something is, I think, the way to go.
The only reason I kind of bring it up from from a governance relate point of view is obviously at some point you're pumping data into these systems. You've got business intelligence in here, like, for example, Granola, for example, you've got business meetings getting kind of popped into there. You've got kind of whole historical information in there, and then you're kind of maybe moving to different systems. And there's a challenge there from a kind of governance point of view is, where is my data sat from all of the, as a business, and how are we kind of accessing that and managing that?
Yeah. So I think it's like trying to like build your company's like second brain, right? So even if I think about like how I use Granola, like I don't keep it in Granola. I'm immediately like storing it as files on my computer, so that if I then switch to a different tool, I do the same thing and I own that data. Obviously, that's very difficult to do on like a kind of company level, but having that sort of track of like, where does our data all sit at the moment, but knowing that it is also in a core brain that you can continue to use for future, I think is the way to go.
Yeah, I think.
Sorry, go on, Nick.
Oh, I was going to say, I think it's important, especially if you're trying to do this on the enterprise scale, two things. One is try not to use the AIs as your endpoints. So, they should be the transition state. So the data goes in, they're transitioned, and then it goes out into your enterprise storage. So you're keeping control of that and helps you with migrations, etc., if needed. But the other part is, and this is one of the conversations I'm having with one of my clients at the moment, who are looking to pare down their AI tool usage, because they found that they're using 5 or 6 different ones. And actually what they need to do from their point of view, and I agree with them, is commit to 1 or 2 and then get the enterprise license for that, get it on the year-long subscription, rather than using free trials here and there and free versions which are ingesting data and kind of taking things out of your corporate sandbox. So yeah, start to really kind of pare down usage and try and solve a problem. Don't just go after it because it's shiny and new.
Yeah, potentially there's a kind of a principle there, or a kind of a piece of policy there that sort of says exactly what you said, Nick, and then also, Laura, what you were saying, which is the data doesn't live in it. The data should live somewhere centrally, and it should be a kind of transition tool or a tool to convert data or whatever you want to refer to it as. And there's something there that can be that needs to be thought about.
Then this is where sort of guardrails come in again, because you've got your central store of data with all your transcripts in. And I heard a horror story from a company whose central transcripts got uploaded to one of these tools, and there was a very confidential conversation about restructuring within one of those transcripts that like anyone would have access to. So total minefield. Like AI is amazing and it can do amazing things if it knows the current state of things, but you've got to very carefully think about like what version of the current state of things do different people within your organizations have access to.
Makes sense. And Adam, maybe putting your ISO hat back on, when we were talking about good governance in our prep, you were talking about kind of running 2 parallel tracks. So would you be able to give us a bit of context on that thinking?
Yeah, so I think kind of when kind of I think when it comes to kind of guardrails and people thinking about and employees thinking about utilizing these tools and building things, I think there's a couple of things which are just try and keep it as simple as possible, really. And I think it's 2 things. It's risk monitoring. So yeah, everyone's like, oh my god, risk, like, but it's like, does it touch any PII? Like, really simple question. Does it touch any PII? Does it touch any IP with the business? Like, really simple consideration that anyone should have. And Nick spoke about checklists. This is kind of a key one that kind of should be on that checklist as you're looking at these systems. And then I think the other thing is then, how do you systematically just keep a little bit of a kind of a database or a Google spreadsheet or something very similar, or a Notion page of what's out there, what's being made. Like, it's not, we're just trying to kind of just get a good idea of what's happening, so that we can go, look, there's a bit of a risk there. We need to go and have a conversation with that person or with that team and kind of maybe put some guardrails in place. Or actually, there's 4 things trying to do exactly the same thing here. Let's try and kind of bring them together as one under the organization rather than under an individual. And it just means that you kind of start to get a view, and we start to move away from these zombie automations or zombie processes that are happening across the business that no one's aware of. And we start to bring a little bit more control in place. And I started to kind of think about this as like a kind of living AI inventory, really, and kind of like, what is it? Who's built it? Who depends on it? What data does it touch? And is it customer facing or not? And when was it last reviewed? And who last looked at it? Because also it starts to kind of then bring to the fore everything that you've got going on in your business. Because ultimately, there's big risk around this kind of those zombie kind of things happening in the background that no one's kind of aware of.
Yeah, kind of like an asset register for all of your AI
Oh,
stuff.
I'm not going to. I wasn't going to relate it into that, but yes.
Yeah, nice.
But yeah, like it's something like that. But you can kind of think about it. So it can, and I think then from an ownership point of view, I think even Nick mentioned it earlier. There's this moving away from a single person owning and moving towards maybe like a committee ownership, because this is a cross-functional thing that the entire business is using. Sales and commercial are using it, product is using it, operations is using it, finance is using it. Like all these different teams are using it, and they're all using it in different ways to benefit their ways of working. So actually, how is one person, a COO or a VP of Ops or an Ops director, supposed to have a good visibility on why things are being done in those business units and how they're being done? So I think having a responsible person within each that then is then a committee that then comes together, that then is then kind of wrangled by an ops person, that then kind of distributes the responsibility, means that you kind of get that full business buy-in, rather than kind of someone like myself in a business that everyone kind of goes like, oh wait, hang on, you're the blocker, you're the police, you're the and I think it just means that then the whole business feels ownership over it, rather than it kind of being one person as a gatekeeper.
Yeah, Nick, that kind of fits neatly into like the data champion framework that we set up with customers, right? You're on mute, by the way.
I haven't done that since those days of old Zoom calls. No, that's absolutely right. So having a data champion in each of your areas to speak to, this is how our part of the business is using AI, this is what we're putting into it, this is what we're getting out of it, and this is how our processes are working. Because as Adam's just alluded to, we haven't really had this kind of cross-functional tool before, with the exception of things like your Office suite or your Slack or something like that. Everything else has been like zero is used by your accounting and your finance teams and maybe your sales, and like everyone's just using their own almost siloed tools. And this is the first kind of game-changing example of a tool, other than something like a simple word processing or PowerPoint suite, that's really touching every part of the business, but people are using in very, very different ways in a constantly evolving framework. So a data champion model where you have someone from each area who can essentially take accountability for how AI is being used within their function and work centrally to make sure that it's been done safely across the business is a fantastic model.
And Nick, with your DPO hat on, obviously you act as data protection officer for a portfolio of TrustKey customers. When thinking about AI governance, what role should the data protection officer play in this?
So the data protection officer should not be accountable for any of it, but they should have an awful lot of input into how it's used and be able to talk to safe ways of using AI and input into approval processes. But ultimately, the ownership always has to lie with the businesses and the teams within those businesses that are using them. So whether that be operations, whether that be legal, whether that be sales, but the DPO is there to kind of help bring everything together, to help with the policies, to help with the approval flows, and ultimately to offer advice on how to safely use AI, and even to offer opinions on which are the best stacks to be using at this time for this particular problem. What are we seeing out in the market? What are people doing? What are other DPOs doing elsewhere? Let's give that kind of all-round view.
Yeah, and sorry, another just quick follow-up question. Why can't the internal accountable owner, let's say it's the CEO or the COO, be the DPO?
Because there's an inherent conflict there. You need someone who is divorced from making those kind of decisions in the business to act as a safety barrier, to act as a guardrail, if we're going to be using AI terms here, because you can't. There is a risk when you have someone like a CEO or a head of who is accountable, but also making the decisions about how it's being used, but also they're overseeing the processes.
That makes sense. Sorry, a bit of a tangent there, but I thought it'd be useful. Okay, let's say we've established everyone's using AI. We've established there are a bunch of risks. We've started to write out a policy. We've spoken about guardrails. Laura, how do you actually roll them out and make them happen?
Yeah, so I think related to the idea that you guys have always done with kind of data champions, it's how do you get a group of people from across the business doing this, because it's impossible just for kind of one person, and it's finding those people that can be who are like influential within each department, can inspire people, but are also close enough to the detail to be able to say, this is okay, this is not okay. And again, like from a kind of cultural perspective, having that like expert within each team helps the people that are maybe a little bit more nervous and sort of aren't at the edge. They've got someone they can go to sort of ask questions, and then that person is also close enough to be able to keep an eye on the people that are potentially doing the risky things.
That makes sense. And Laura, we've had a question. It says, would you recommend AI management platforms that integrate Claude, ChatGPT, Gemini into a single secure interface? Is that like Perplexity or something like that? Or I don't quite know what that is.
That would be. I don't think it'd be Perplexity, but I think because this is a challenge that every business is coming up with, I think there are people that are building tools to try and aid it and sort of be that sort of central place. So you've only got one tool, one sort of one interface or one sort of entry point for people using AI, and therefore it can be a little bit more managed. I think there are sort of people looking at that. I haven't come across any businesses that are using that kind of thing. I think most people are sort of sticking to making the decision, are we going to be a co-pilot business, a Claude ChatGPT business? But then that might be the solution in future, perhaps, but I haven't heard of anyone using that at this stage.
That makes sense. And then there have been two other comments. AI governance professionals exist, hire them for guidance. Yeah, agree. We do AI. You can hire TrustKeith. We do AI governance. Just a cheeky plug. And then have TrustKeith got any templates for a checklist that organizations can use for the use of new AI tools that can be paired together with a policy? Yes. If you drop me an email after, I'll be happy to share a couple of examples. So yes, we can do that. Adam, over to you. Just in terms of rolling guardrails out. Any comments you'd like to add there? You're on mute.
Apologies. There we go. Laura, you're next. We can do a full house. I think with scale ups and starting with this, it's keep it as lightweight as possible. It's like with anything in this space. It's if you go big, bulky, 50-page document, as you guys mentioned, people are just not going to read it. People aren't going to follow it. Keep it lightweight. Keep it action orientated. And I think you'll be surprised that people will kind of start to see it as an enabler rather than as a blocker. And I think that's it. It should be there to support the business and the innovation within the business. And I think kind of framing it in that manner as well is the way that we should be communicating it with people. And I think the other thing that we have to consider is this kind of top down, bottom up kind of, thinking as well. And obviously it comes in through a lot of different manners in the business of, senior leadership should be kind of caring about it, should be thinking about it, and should be making sure that the business is following kind of the right behaviors, but also we should then be enabling kind of the bottom up as well and kind of giving people the space to kind of try new things and whatnot. But I guess that bottom down approach of good practice should lead, and leading by example is how we should be truly thinking about this as well. Because if we're setting it from the top, then people will follow. Hopefully, people will follow those good practices rather than it being the Wild West.
Yeah, but that makes sense.
I think this kind of framing though sits with it is a general practice, and it's not just AI. It's all different manners of adoption and of values, etc. As well within the business. So
yeah, agreed. And Nick, anything to add? We like to say, obviously, at TrustKeith, and when we have these more broad conversations, a lot of people think of like AI governance and data protection as like a maybe legal or technical issue, but it's very much like a cultural issue. So anything you'd
Oh,
like to add to that?
absolutely. It's a human issue without a doubt. Like the way to solve it is to you make the right behavior the easy behavior to do. So talk about those 2-minute checklists. If you make it easy for people to do the right thing, they will do the right thing. And you want to start with education rather than going straight into enforcement. If people understand why they're being asked to do things in a certain way, they're much more likely to do it than just being told you must do this or you must not do that. And on top of that, you need kind of clear boundaries. Like mistakes happen in the grey, as people say. You've got your behaviour that's allowed, you've got your behaviour that's outlawed, but you've got this grey area in the middle, and that's where you get mistakes. Whether it's someone putting some data into a free version of an LLM that they've got on their phone or something like that. So clear policies around that, and senior leadership, as Adam's just said, need to be using this, and they need to be seen to be using AI, because that's where people will get the permission to use it in their business. Like you can look back just a year or two ago on the discourse on the internet about people secretly using AI for their jobs because they thought that they would get in trouble for doing it, and people will think that I'm not really doing my job. It's like, you are. This is now another tool that you're doing. You wouldn't say I'm secretly using a laptop for my job, because that is just a tool that does it for you. And the last thing I'd say is, when you're building out these policies and these processes, you get your human in the loop from day one. So making sure that you're not making decisions, you don't have an agent off running, doing things without any oversight permission from day one, because it's so much easier to build these processes from scratch than it is to retrofit that kind of behavior in later when something goes wrong.
Nice, that makes sense. And we've had a quick question. Gareth's gone there and mentioned the ROPA. For those, just for context, for those who don't know, a ROPA is a record of processing activities. It's a legal requirement under the GDPR, and it's effectively an asset that you need to maintain that registers all of the different types of data you process, where they're stored, how long they're retained for. It's a legal requirement, but it's also a very useful document in context of data protection. Gareth's question is, do you have any tips on keeping the ROPA up to date in the age of AI tools and user experimentation? Nick, as DPO, I'll come to you with that one for that one first.
Yeah, absolutely. So the answer is that people should not be using AI tools without some sort of oversight and knowledge that those are being deployed in the system. And that's how they get into the ROPA. That's how they go into the record of processing activities. Experimentation is fine within the tool, but what you don't want is someone deploying this tool into your infrastructure without any sort of oversight, and therefore it bypasses your ROPA, it bypasses any sort of review, it bypasses guardrails, it bypasses anything that stops your data leaving the company, or improper things being done with it, or bad decisions being made. So yeah, this is about getting your approval process in, and it needs to be an easy, quick and efficient approval process, or again, people won't use it. But the ROPA just slots right into that.
I think that makes sense. I think Gareth might have been coming at it from the angle of like using AI to create a ROPA and maintain it on an ongoing basis, which I think definitely there's a use case for using LLMs to do that and speed up the process, because it can be a very painful process to do, particularly when it comes to maintaining a ROPA. Gareth, the one point I would just add on that, and then Laura, Adam, welcome any comments after, is that using AI to keep a ROPA up to date is definitely a smart use case. But in our experience as DPOs, one of the most useful aspects of creating a ROPA is meeting people across the business to understand how they're using data. And that is where you often get the best and most real insights on what's actually happening. So yes, use AI to keep your ROPA up to date, but do not only do that. Make sure that you actually speak to people, catch up with them, because that's where you're going to catch the little insights that you don't catch from an email or an AI prompt, basically. Laura, Adam, I don't know if you've got any comments on that at all. If not, we can go to wrap up with some key takeaways. In which case, Adam, would you like to kick us off with a wrap up on key takeaways?
Yeah, I think for me, 2 key takeaways for people kind of on the call is do an AI audit this week. Have a chat to people in your business. Ask people what they're up to. Like, grab 15 minutes with different team members, different team leads maybe, and just sort of ask them, what have you built? What are you using? What data? And then kind of then figure out what does your data touch, and start to build a really kind of like basic version of what I was describing as this kind of AI inventory. And I think, you might be excited about what people are up to and find out some interesting things that actually might be useful for other parts of the business. So I think kind of that's a nice sort of way just to expose yourself to what's going on if you don't already do that. And then I think the other thing is talking to those people might also start to then influence what might be the first kind of swathe of your governance committee that might sit and start to meet once a month or every quarter about what's going on and what people are up to in the business. So I think the two kind of nicely dovetail together as to actions that people can take off the back of this session.
Nice. Okay, Nick, any wrap up points? Then Laura, I'll come to you. Then I've got one more question to wrap up at the end as well. Nick,
yeah.
you.
Get your AI policy in place. Like, shadow AI is happening inside your business. If you don't have an AI policy, your employees aren't waiting for you to put one in place before they start using AI. So get that in place. But bear in mind that the policy doesn't change behavior. You need to really embed that behavior through training, through seeing how people are using AI, and through kind of building things around people, because ultimately your business is almost certainly not an AI business, but you will be using AI in your business.
Laura, anything you'd like to add on the wrap up?
Yeah, so for me, I think it's about figuring out how you can get the results of an AI policy in a sort of rebranded way that get people on board. So with policy, I tend to think like, it's static, it's a document, it's, we've done the job. But how can you create that culture that has the effect of what the sort of AI policy is doing? So something that, is sort of keeping everything safe, sort of giving people guardrails, giving people permission, but without sort of using the policy word, and making it part of your culture instead.
Policy word. Right, we've got a question. What better way to end than with DSARs? So for anyone who doesn't know, a DSAR is an abbreviation. It means data subject access request. It's part of part of the GDPR, where people have a right to request the data that you process about them, and they have the right to request that you delete that data in some circumstances too. Nick, probably your favourite topic, I assume. Everyone loves a DSAR.
Love it.
And the question is, what is the process regarding a DSAR if the data has been used in an AI model? And what is the data subject's right to be, and what is the data subject rights to be forgotten?
So this is a really complicated zone at the moment. The ICO has recognised the kind of the tension between subject data rights and the way that AIs are being used in business, but they haven't come out with solutions yet. The most defensible position is to keep records of what data has been used, because there's a very interesting argument around, once the data has been ingested and is in your system, there's a very strong argument that that data isn't actually in your system in the same way anymore. It's been applied to training weights on your AI system rather than existing as its own kind of record. The most defensible way is probably to exclude that training data from your next run of your model. So while you'll still have that data in there in your kind of current model, the idea is that when you're retraining, you're excluding that data specifically, making sure that you've got logs of how the data was obtained and how it was put in there. Make sure you've got your lawful basis in place for why the data exists in the system in the first place. So did you gather it under consent? Did you gather it under legitimate interests, and so on? But yeah, it's a complex area. It's constantly evolving, and none of the big regulators have come out with an answer on it yet, other than to acknowledge that it's definitely a problem.
Yes, and for everyone on the call, our last event was on DSARs, and we're going to be running a DSAR roundtable next month as well, because they are coming up a lot. So I'll wrap up there. Adam, Laura, Nick, thank you so much for joining us. It's been very, very useful. And to all of our attendees, you'll be receiving the recording and an AI policy template to get started shortly after this. So thank you and enjoy the coming heatwave.